Kia ora koutou. Welcome to today's webinar regarding Immigration New Zealand's new Accredited Employer Work Visa process, which comes into effect from 4 July 2022. Thank you very much for attending. It is wonderful to see so many of you online today, particularly as many of you employ medical professionals from overseas. It is vital for you to be aware of the changes, what you need to do to become an accredited employer, and what the process is to have your job approved, all resulting in a successful outcome for you and the professional you are recruiting. My name is Luke Baddington. I'm the General Manager at Workforce Recruitment at NZ Locums and NZ Med Jobs, and joining me is Ayumi Sakakibara, Program and Events Coordinator. Together we'll be hosting the webinar today. We are very fortunate to have Hiro Kuruki and Paul Miller, both Relationship Managers at Immigration New Zealand, to present at today's webinar. As relationship managers, one of their key roles is to educate employers on immigration policy and process to help them use the immigration system efficiently. Thank you both for being here today to present. Before we start today's webinar, I need to touch on some housekeeping items. Firstly, we will be recording today's webinar, and this will be available on our website shortly after. You will receive an email from my colleague Ayumi regarding this shortly. We will run a Q&A session at the end of the webinar today. There will be no open mic. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. You will find this located on the top bar in Teams next to the reactions button. During the Q&A session, we can then refer to the questions that you have posted here. Regarding the chat function, please only use this if you're experiencing technical difficulties. Ayumi will keep an eye on this and will try to assist. Any specific questions relating to your personal or business situation may not be appropriate to address in this webinar. Paul and Hiro are happy to engage with you after the webinar, either through NZ Locums or directly. Thanks once again for attending today. I'll hand it over to Hiro and Paul.
Thank you very much, Luke. Just want to make sure that the presentation is on your screen. If you see the presentation, just let me know. Yeah, it's working, Luke.
Sure is.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Hi, my name is Hiro Kuroki. I am a relationship manager at Immigration New Zealand. So thank you for joining us today. Together with my colleague Paul Miller, we will explain how the Accredited Employer Work Visa works. This new policy will be introduced in July. So let's start. Okay, so this is the agenda today. So I will cover the overview of the Accredited Employer Work Visa policy, and then we will move to the employer accreditation. So there are some types of accreditation, and I will cover the requirement and the process as well. And Paul Miller, my colleague Paul, will explain what the job check is and what involves. And finally, the third step of the Accredited Employer Work Visa, applying for the actual work visa. So that's the last part of accreditation, last part of the policy. And finally, we will have the question and answer time. Okay, let's look at the overview. So Accredited Employer Work Visa is an employer-led and three-check system. So at the first stage, employer has to get accreditation. So if the employers want to hire migrants on Accredited Employer Work Visa, they have to apply for accreditation first. And this process will start from the 23rd of May. So in about a week, you can start applying for an accreditation. Once you got the accreditation, then you can move to the job check. So that's where employers need to demonstrate that they have to test. They have tested the labor market in New Zealand to make sure that there is no New Zealanders available to the job. So this job check can be applied from the 20th of June And at this stage, Immigration New Zealand will also check whether the employment agreements are up to New Zealand standards. In the last stage of this policy, so visa application, so that's where actual workers, so migrant workers can apply for work visa from the 4th of July. So, and from the 4th of July, the policy will be fully introduced. And you may be aware that there is an essential, you may be using essential skills work visa at the moment. So essential skills work visa will be available until the 3rd of July. And on the 4th of July, accredited employer work visa will replace the essential skills work visa. Okay, let's look at the accreditation part a little bit more closely here. As I said, there are some types of accreditation. The standard and high volume should cover most of the attendees today. So standard accreditation is for employers who want to hire up to 5 migrant workers on accredited employer work visa. High volume accreditation, you may need high volume accreditation if you are planning to hire 6 or more migrants on accredited employer work visa. Please remember, this includes only accredited employer work visa holders. So, for example, if you have only 3 accredited employer work visa holders and another 3 work visa holders who have, for example, working holiday visa or work visa based on partnership, the total number of the migrant workers is 6, but you have only 3 migrant workers on accredited employer work visas. So in this case, you are fine with the standard accreditation. But if you have 6 or more migrant workers on the accredited employer work visa at any time, then you may want to consider applying for high volume accreditation. If you are not sure whether standard is enough or whether you need to apply for high volume, then you can always apply for standard accreditation first. And if you realize that you may need 6 or more migrants, then you can always upgrade to high volume by paying the difference of the fee. There are 2 other types of accreditation, franchisees and also third-party accreditation. So I don't think there are franchisees today, but there might be some employers who place migrant with controlling third parties. So we call it third-party accreditation. So let's look at this accreditation type a little bit more. So what is that? What is a controlling third party? So these are the typical criteria. So if the third party is a separate legal entity from accredited employer and exercises control over the accredited employer work visa holders, similar to an employer, and has a contract with accredited employer that allows an accredited employer work visa holders to perform work for the benefit of the third party. So it sounds very complicated, but good example is New Zealand locums. So New Zealand locums hires GPs, nurses, and they place migrants, they place GPs and nurses to the third party, which may be a local general practice. And doctors and nurses are hired or employed by NZ locums, but they are working for the third party, for the local GPs. And NZ locum and local GP, NZ locums and local GP probably have a contract. So if that's the case, NZ locums needs to consider applying for a third-party accreditation because they want to place migrant to the third party. Yeah, so it sounds very complicated, but it's relatively simple. But most of the attendees should be covered by standard or high volume. These are the minimum requirements for the employers, regardless of which type of the accreditation they apply for. So the business has to be viable and genuinely operating business. So which means that they have to be registered with IRD, and they have to have their own New Zealand business number. We do not request financial statements for your initial accreditation application. So all what you need to do is a declaration. Also, you may need to complete the settlement support activities in the next 12 months. So what the settlement support activities means, you have to, for example, provide the information around the community, or, for example, how to get an IRD or accommodation options to the migrant workers. You don't have to meet it now again, but you need to declare that you will meet this criteria in the next 12 months. You also need to comply with immigration and employment and business standard. And you have to pay the recruitment cost. So this cost, a recruitment cost, cannot be passed on to the migrant. As an employer, you have to complete online learning modules. So there are 7 modules that needs to be completed by employers. Each of them should take about 15 to 20 minutes. And once you finish the modules, you will get the certificate or confirmation email. So please keep it with yourself. And employers also have to allow employees to complete online learning modules and during the working hours. And again, when you apply for the initial accreditation from the 23rd of May, you do not have to meet these criteria, but you will need to complete the modules within the next 12 months. And immigration may ask for the evidence when you renew the accreditation after 12 months of being on the initial accreditation. So there are additional requirements for franchisees and employers wanting to place migrants on accredited employer work visas with controlling third parties. So please have a look at the website. There are more detailed criteria and the detailed information there. We cannot cover all the information today because of the time constraint, but please have a look at our website. Right, let's look at the duration of the accreditation. So initial accreditation will be valid for 12 months. And again, when you apply for the initial accreditation, you need to declare that you will meet these criteria that I just explained before. And after 12 months, if you still need migrant workers on the accredited employer work visa, then you need to apply for to renew your accreditation. And at the renewal, if you want to renew your standard or high volume accreditation, they will be valid for 2 years. If you have a franchisee or third party accreditation, then they will be valid for 12 months. So most of you probably have to renew the accreditation every 2 years. And these are the costs. So standard accreditation costs $740. High volume accreditation, $1,220. And as I mentioned before, you can upgrade from standard to high volume, and that costs cost you the difference of the standard and high volume accreditation, which is $480. Employers placing migrants with controlling third parties, so that's slightly expensive. That's reflecting post issuance verification check activities for us. So it costs just below $4,000. And franchisees, employers, franchisee accreditation costs about $2,000. If your accreditation application is declined, and if you want to request, you can still request a reconsideration. That will cost $240. Right. So I will pass it to Paul. Paul will explain the job check.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you, Hiro. And you'll have to excuse me because I'll have to ask Hiro to move the slides for me this morning. But good morning to you all. So we're talking now about the job check, and the job check is the second part of the Accredited Employer Work Visa process. It presupposes that you've gained accreditation. So the people that can submit a job check must be obviously attached to an accredited employer. So if you've been through that process and become accredited, then you have the ability to apply for what we call a job check. A job check really is a pre-approval for an employer to be able to recruit for certain occupations, for certain jobs in certain locations. Once that job check has been approved, it will be assigned to that employer, and then a non-New Zealand resident or citizen can apply for what we call an accredited employer work visa for a particular job that's been approved under that job check. Can we move to the next slide, please, Edel? So in terms of applying for that job check, there are three things that we require. The first thing is a detailed job description. Okay, and obviously we need to know the various tasks and skills required for that job. We need to see a proposed employment agreement. And it's really important that we see that because we need to understand that the role that's been offered meets all those employment standards that are required under New Zealand employment law, things like rate of pay, location of employment. We need to know what type of employment it is. Is it fixed term? Is it permanent? We need to know that all those standards are being met. And you've got to understand as well, when the migrant goes to apply later on for their visa, we'll be looking at the information that you've supplied for the job check to make sure that they align, that it's the same job, the same offer, the same remuneration, all those sorts of things. Lastly, we require evidence of advertising for the job if required. Now, Hiro and I both know that for many of you out there, that the roles, the occupations that you're hiring for potentially will not require advertising. So don't be frightened off if you're hiring GPs. We're not talking about that particular occupation, but there may be roles, perhaps administrative type roles, that you might want to hire a migrant worker for, in which case there would potentially need to be some advertising provided at the job check stage prior to somebody being able to apply for a work visa. So those are the three things in essence that we would be looking for when you're submitting a job check application. Next slide, please, Hiro. So there are caveats in regards to advertising and when it's not required. So proof of advertising is required for all jobs unless, and here are the two things here, the job is rated at, in terms of median wage, twice the median wage, being paid at least $55.52 per hour. So that's twice the current median wage, or the occupation that you've put in or submitting for the job check is on what we call a green list. So we've just recently released the green list. It's, if you think back to the current state or previously, we used to have the long-term skill shortage list and the immediate skill shortage list. We've got a new thing called the green list that has all kinds of benefits, and Hiro will talk a lot more about that at the back end of the session. But if the occupation is either paid at the rate above or on a green list, on one of those two things, then you won't have to provide advertising as part of the job check process for that particular occupation and job offer. Next slide, please, Hill. Again, that's just talking about the green list, and there are a number of occupations on that list at the moment, and you can go to Appendix 13. It's probably easier to Google it for the green list, and it'll tell you all the occupations on there and the requirements. So there are requirements that have to be met. Obviously, for GPs, it would be that they have to have New Zealand registration through the Medical Council to be able to qualify under the green list, and so that you don't have to apply for don't have to submit advertising. If you were talking about roles like physicians associates, those sorts of things where there's no current registration requirement, then that would be different, and you wouldn't get a waiver for advertising for that particular type of role. But if it's on the screen list, then you'll be fine. Next please, Hiddle. Hiring for multiple positions. So with a job check, when you're submitting a job check, there's probably a little bit of predictive work. So you might determine that over the next few months, and remember, job checks last for about 6 months. Well, 6 months. You need to do some predicting. You might say, well, I think I'm going to need 3 GPs over the next 6 months. You can submit a job check for multiple positions, as long as they are for the same conditions, the same location, in the same remuneration range, with the same type of employment agreement. So they must be either fixed term or permanent, but they can't be a mix of both. We need to see that the qualifications and the experience and the skills that are required for a particular role are the same. So if they meet this requirement, if they're pretty much the same job in the same region with the same skills, same job description, then you can submit multiple positions within a job check, as opposed to having to do one for each and every individual role. Next, please, Hiddle. There are standards required for meeting a job check, not unsimilar to or dissimilar to what we currently require. So, for example, right now for a work visa, we require that the job offer be full-time for any migrant, which is at least 30 hours per week, guaranteed. And that's going to be the same for a job check role. We also have implemented a new threshold, which is that it must be paid above the market rate of $27.76, which is the current median wage, unless there's an exemption. And there are certain exemptions that relate to specific roles like aged care roles and certain construction roles. People must be paid at least monthly. The role must comply with all relevant employment laws and standards, and it can't be for self-employment. I know some of you take on contractors or people that want to be self-employed, but for a work visa, technically we cannot provide a work visa under instructions for self-employment. I think there's a little bit of getting away with that under the specific purpose instructions for finite periods of time for highly critical roles, but in terms of the Accredited Employer Work Visa for the job check, if it's for self-employment, it won't be able to go through this process. Next slide, please, Hiddle. Attempts to recruit New Zealanders by advertising. Of course, like we've said before, if it's for a GP, which is on a green list, which is, you don't have to provide advertising. But if it is for a role that requires advertising, then we need to see that the role that you've advertised, it has the same tasks and responsibilities that align with the job check. The terms and conditions of employment must align with the job check from the advertising. And the minimum qualifications and work experience that are requested in the advert must align with the job check. So what you can see is we want to make sure that that New Zealanders are given the same opportunities as the migrant worker that's been accepted. And B, we also want to make sure that the migrant worker is not being, given any less advantage. So in terms of maybe they're being paid less or whatever. So it's to make sure that that's fair. Okay, next, please, Hiddle. In regards to that advertising, the minimum requirements we're kind of looking for is that there's really good reach. Okay, so when you're advertising for a role, we want to make sure that it's provided for, it's being advertised genuinely, and that there's plenty of reach. So if you think about some of the roles that you might have to advertise for, say it's for an admin worker, we want to see that it's been listed on Seek or Trade Me Jobs or some other national platform that gives it the reach that it should, So some companies will come to us sometimes and say, oh, we put it on our intranet, or, we just flipped it on our Facebook page. We don't know what the reach is for that. So, you'd have to make a pretty good case. It can be on an industry-specific job listing website. So if you think about teachers, they usually go through the Education Gazette. We know that that's the national and international first port of call for teachers applying for jobs. So that works as well. Advertising must be for at least 14 days, calendar days. And the job ad must have closed prior to the job check application being submitted. All right. And when it's submitted, that advertising can't be older than 90 days when it's submitted with the job check application. So it must be within 90 days of that job check application. That's pretty much standard for what we do now for essential skills work visas. Next slide. Determining the location of the job. So that's really important in the job check as well. If you're going to be hiring someone working across in different regions, and we'll talk about what that is in a second, then you're going to need to do advertising, if it's advertising required across multiple regions. That will also require multiple job checks. So at the moment, under current instructions, so location is really important. Now we know with GPs that they're primarily carrying out work in a specific base of operations. So we know that principally what's going to go on the employment agreement, what's going to go in the job check will be where they're working. And it must be within a region, a specific region. So you can't provide a job offer for somebody to work across multiple regions because labour markets are different. So those regions are defined by regional council boundaries. And if we're looking at the job offer and the employment agreement, and we're looking at the job check, an officer might see that actually this job is actually based in multiple locations. We need to understand that so that we can make sure that when we approve it, it's based on what's in the employment agreement, because the employment agreement determines where somebody's working. Next slide, please. Now, when a job check is approved, there are some things that you'll note. Okay, so you get 6 months on a job check. 6 months allows you to go out and support work visas. If you haven't already got people lined up that you were keen on supporting for a work visa, it gives you 6 months to use that job check. That job check will be valid for that period of time, or in the case where an employer decides to revoke, lets their accreditation lapse, or we revoke it for one reason or another, then that's the period of validity for that. But in general, it'll be 6 months. The job check will specify those things that were outlined, the occupation, the minimum maximum remuneration, the number of jobs, when the job check starts and expires. Those things will be all in the job check, so that when you're hiring, you need to make sure that it aligns with the job check. Just a note that we say 6 months, but if you're applying for that job check from the 20th of June when these open, then any application prior to July 4th for a job check will be granted up until January 2024. So 2023, sorry. So it'll be the 4th of January 2023, so that you're not disadvantaged because you're applying in advance of the opening date of the system. But in general, it'll be 6 months. Next slide, please. Okay, so it'll be associated to an employer. So a job check, when it's approved, will be assigned to an employer, and it'll be assigned to that employer until it expires or is cancelled or varied. So when a non-New Zealand citizen or resident wants to apply for an accredited employer work visa, that employer that's had their job check approved will be issued with some job tokens, obviously electronic tokens that they can use. They can give those unique identifiers to an applicant, and that applicant can't apply for a work visa without it. So when they go to apply for that work visa, they'll be expected to have been issued with a token from you, the accredited employer. If a work visa is withdrawn or declined, so when the applicant later on makes that visa application, you can reuse that place, that spot, and that token for that job. So, and that will happen at the point of 14 days after the application is declined, or from the time when the application is withdrawn, whichever is the earlier. Next slide, please. And I'll hand it over to Hero from here on in.
Thanks, Paul. So I will cover the last part of the Accredited Employer Work Visa, which is a third step. So as Paul said, if the employers got approval for a job check, then they will receive the special token, and with this token, the migrant can apply for a work visa. And when they apply for work visa, they have to submit copy of employment agreement and copy of signed offer of employment and job check number from accredited employer. So that is a special token. So this is what immigration officer would check. So they would check whether the migrant meet generic work visa requirements, including health and character requirements, and also whether they are suitably qualified by training and experience to do the job offered. So that's more for this sector, for GPs, it's more registration from Medical Council New Zealand. And of course, whether they have the offer of employment that meets requirement. And there's a there's the last box here, if the employer or if the migrants are paid below the median wage, then they are subject to stand down period. I don't expect that this will happen to this sector, but yeah, just in case. Yeah. So stand down period means after 2 years, they have to go home and they cannot stay in New Zealand more than that period. So requirements for the employment offered. So the employment must be genuine and include full job employment agreement must be genuine and include full job description and name, address, contact details of both employer and employee. Employment offered must also match the details of the approved job check application, including meeting the salary threshold. So immigration officer will determine whether the applicant is suitably qualified. So the immigration officer would check with their work experience, qualification, and skills and other specifications listed by employers. So this is an example for chef. So chef has to have the New Zealand certificate in level 4, but for the doctors, for GPs, that would be the registration from Medical Council, and same as for the nurses as well. So the condition of accredited employer work visa, so the maximum duration is 3 years if they are paid above median wage. So that's the same duration as the essential skills work visa. In maximum 2 years if they are paid below the median wage. And as I said, they will be subject to stand down period after 2 years. And the accredited employer work visa will specify the occupation and employer and location and salary as well. And if they want to change the job or employer, they may be able to do so through the variation of conditions. Or maybe some people may have to apply for the entire the new visa, new work visa, but most of people probably in this sector can change the employer or location by applying for a variation of conditions. And pathway to residence. So Paul explained, Paul just said there will be a green list, and we have just published the occupations on the green list. So green list have 2 tiers. So first tier, which is fast track straight to residence. So GPs are on the tier 1. So they will have the fast track to residency. So once they receive the accredited employer work visa and start working in New Zealand, they should be able to apply for a residence visa pretty much straight away. So this residence visa pathway will start from September. So if they are coming here from July onward, they should be able to apply for a resident visa after 2 months. And there is a tier 2 on green list occupations. So that's for the work to residence pathway. So registered nurse, they are on tier 2. So they can come here on the accredited employer work visa. And after 2 years working in New Zealand, they should be able to apply for a resident visa. And this is not the only pathway to residency. The skilled migrant category will also open later this year. However, a lot of occupations in the health sector should be covered by are covered by green list. So this is a good opportunity for them to apply for residency. All right, thank you for listening to us today. So there are more detailed information available on our website. So please have a look at the website. And if you are not sure, of course, you can ask a question through NZ Locums or to us directly. Okay, let's move on to the question and answer time. Back to Luke.
Yeah, thank you, Hero and Paul. That was wonderful. It was good to get a really good overview of the changes that are coming and how important it is for our practices to become accredited or at least understand the process. So thank you very much. Firstly, I'm going to probably just review the questions that have come in prior to this webinar. We reached out to the practices individuals to see if they had any questions prior to the webinar. I'll just go over those first, and then we'll look at the ones that have come in via the Q&A. And I'll get Ayumi to click publish in terms of those Q&As very shortly, so we can all see what they are. But firstly, Hero, you did touch on it already around the resident pathway from September, or the was it the tier 1 green list, so for GPs. And I guess there was one question was, I know it's probably hard to give how long it will take for them to get residency, but is there any sort of, in an ideal world, how long it might take for someone if they apply in September for residency, how long that may take?
Yeah, so the obviously residency applications will take a little bit longer than work visa applications, just because it involves a lot of checks. So generally speaking, it could take up to 12 months.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. And I think just a question in the back of that, because there might be medical professionals looking at coming out, next year, for example, and whether or not they're better off applying for residency straight away from their home country, or do they come out on the accredited employer work visa, then do it here? Because I guess that's a timing thing. That's all very good. So thank you for that, Hero. Now, there was a question, and you touched on it again, and the question has actually come up in the Q&A as well, around this question was the accredited employer work visa the only way to employ GPs from overseas? And you've touched on the specific purpose pathway, and that's something that's in existence right now and will continue. And I guess the key question around that is it's for finite period of time, and I guess also the accredited employer work visa is for people who are employees not contractors. So would the specific purpose pathway be more appropriate for people who are coming and working as contractors for a 12-month period of time, for example? What's the most appropriate scenario, I guess, for a doctor coming into New Zealand and applying for that specific purpose pathway? Or is that too specific question? I guess I just asked that question.
Do you want me to
Oh.
answer that, Hiddle?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So yeah, specific purpose still exists.
Yep.
It's still an avenue and an option.
Yep.
And it's probably the best way we can accommodate people under that arrangement. But like we've said before, it is for a finite specific period of time. And that you can't apply for that from offshore, obviously, at the moment.
Yep.
You won't be able to apply for that until the trying to think actually after July the 4th, when we start receiving work visas from offshore again, then they'll be able to make an application from that point in time. I guess one of the things is obviously, you know, it is a kind of a system that's trying to accommodate a broad range of employers. So it's not always going to fit the requirements specifically for a particular industry. So at the moment, we still have specific work as an option, but we also know that once they've finished their specific work purpose visa, then if you were wanting to retain them long term, then you would need to consider accredited employer, becoming an accredited employer to support them beyond that period of time if they really like New Zealand and want to stay here. Obviously, a lot of locums just want to come for a year or so, and that's fine. But that's something to just have in the back of your minds should you want to sustain them for a longer period of time. And under that policy, the new policy, which is the same as the essential skills, you have to actually have them as a typical traditional employee as opposed to a contractor to meet that policy.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you for that. That's great. Appreciate that. There's some other questions. I'm just flicking across now into the Q&A side of things that have come through. There's a question here around, could a PHO be considered a third party? I guess it comes down to more what the employment relationship is with the individual. Would that be correct? Sort of, do you guys, are you in a position to answer that, or is that something we can follow up a bit later with you? Or
sorry, can you rephrase the question again? Sorry.
I guess there's a question around, could a PHO, so a primary health organisation, could they, would they be seen as a third party? I presume maybe in the sense a PHO might employ a GP to move around practices within the organisation. Would that be more around who's employing that doctor, for example, if the PHO actually employed that doctor as an employee to move around a number of different medical centres within their organisation, would that be okay for an accredited employer? Or would they have to be a third party for that? I guess the question is.
Yeah, can I answer that one, Hiddle?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So in regards to that, they would need a specific accreditation. So Hiddle went through all the different fees and the different types of accreditation.
Yeah.
An organisation, so if you had a PHO and they had multiple locations, and those multiple locations were had different business numbers, then they might be subsidiaries, but they've got different business numbers. They're different separate legal entities. That PHO could be the direct employer as long as they're the ones issuing the employment agreement, as long as they're the ones responsible for the hiring of that worker. Then they could operate as an employer that is placing people with controlling third parties. Controlling third parties would be those clinics that they're sending them to, that they're under their care while they're there, but the employment agreement must come from the PHO. So that would be the instance. The difference would be is if the PHO and those multiple locations were the same business number, same everything else, in which case that would be standard accreditation. But you would have to make sure that in the employment agreement that the locations are listed, that they have the ability to move around those locations within a region, because you can't have them going outside of the region. So
Gotcha.
so that would be, and So we have, as an example, aged care in Auckland. We have aged care providers who are the same business, but they've got multiple sites or satellites around Auckland. As long as it's in the employment agreement that they are going to be expected to work in those multiple locations, and that you're providing them with incentives, and they know and they've signed up to that they can move around to those places, and they're going to be given, if needed, if they have to have, allowances and things for travel and all that sort of stuff. If that's all a part of the deal, then that's fine. But if you just had, they're at a XYZ location, they couldn't go and work for ABC location because it's that specific. So if you would have to have that you would need to say they work for PHO Limited in Auckland. That would allow them to work for all of your PHO branches within that region.
Gotcha.
But if you put a specific location in there, then it will only be granted a visa allowing them to work in that location. Sorry, I've probably rambled off a bit. But, sorry,
no.
you can answer the next one.
Well, the next one is, how are we impacted with the Accredited Employer Work Visa if we have already employed GPs? Employment agreements already signed with start dates from August.
Right. So I assume this doctor is going to get a border exception and a critical purpose visitor visa to come to New Zealand. That's the process in place at the moment. So the border is still closed to the workers coming to New Zealand. So if you want to bring the workers now, they have to apply for a border exception in critical purpose visitor visa. And if they have received the critical purpose visitor visa already, they can travel to New Zealand. And if they travel to New Zealand before 31st of July, they may be eligible to apply for a resident visa under 2021 resident visa. Yeah. And if their start date is August, they can still do that. They can still come here July or August and start the job. And the critical purpose visitor visa should allow them to work somewhere between 6 to 12 months, depending on the person. And if they want to stay here longer than that period, then they have to apply for. They probably have to apply for accredited employer work visa, because essential skills work visa will not be available from the 4th of July.
Perfect. All right, thank you, mate. That's brilliant. Thank you. There's a question here. It's quite a long one. It's just, what happens if an applicant has signed employment offer with an employer and is denied a work visa? This could place the employer in a difficult position unless the offer was specifically subject to the applicant receiving a visa. I guess those type of questions, while it's very unfortunate when that happens, there's not really much that can be done about that. And I guess, as you mentioned in the webinar, the token or that vacancy can go to someone else, can be reused. Is that correct? Yep.
Yeah.
And certainly, look, these situations don't normally happen, but it's very unfortunate when it does. And I guess the other part of that question that was around that was, sorry about this. And apologies, may have touched on this, but when an applicant has been given a token and applies for a position, how long does it typically, do you expect, will it take for that applicant to be awarded an accredited work visa? Is there some targets in mind? Obviously, you guys have got a lot of work at the moment on your plate, but is there an ideal target in mind, how long it would take?
Yeah.
So we've already published it, but Hero, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So our goal is to process the accreditation applications within 10 working days. So in 10 working days.
Oh, yep. Cool.
And the second stage, the job check, our goal is to process in 10 working days again.
Yep.
And work visa application, which is the third stage of the policy, that will take about 20 working days.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so remember the first part, the accreditation part, the employers have to probably go through the process every 2 years. Yeah.
The other thing to note as well is we do expect there'll probably be a little bit of a bottleneck to start with, because that kind of happens when these new things are introduced. And so, just be aware that if you're applying on the 23rd of May, that our intention is to do it within 10 days for your accreditation. And it is a new fully online process. It is going to be streamlined. It's declaration based. It's very intuitive and easy to use. So over time, our expectation it'll be a lot quicker, but 10 days is kind of what we've aiming for. But just note that there's always kind of, with these things start, people are all trying to chomp at the bit to get online and get going. So it may or may not impact on the time frame, but we've also ramped up resources to support the application process. So we've hired a whole another branch in Christchurch basically to support this new process. And like I said, it is going to be fully online as opposed to some of our other archaic processes. So it should be relatively streamlined in the long run. It's always teething problems with these things, but we'll get there.
Yep. No, that sounds good. And there's a question here that was, is there a simple how-to guide for businesses less familiar with Immigration New Zealand to easily complete requirements? I guess I haven't been on your website over the last week or two, but is there some links that perhaps we could, Yumi could probably email people after this webinar just to, I guess, explain the process further? Would that be okay if you guys could forward that through to us?
Yeah, sure. I can send the relevant links to you later. But yeah, all the information is on the website. So our website is probably the best place to look at first.
Cool.
Yeah. Again, so there's no process map or a checklist published by Immigration New Zealand, but for the initial accreditation application, so which is the first stage, that is all online application, and it's you don't have to provide much evidence. So you just need to declare that you will meet these criteria within 12 months.
Okay, great. And thank you, Hiro. There are some further questions, but I think they're quite technical, and also I'm just looking at them for it could be how long's a piece of string. So I think what we'll do is, if there are some questions through via the Q&A that we haven't answered, please feel free to either email them to myself or Yumi, as mentioned. Excuse me, Yumi will be in touch after this webinar with a link to the video, so you can go and watch that. But I think also, if you've got any specific questions, please email them back to Yumi or myself. I just double checking the Q&As now, Hiro and Paul, just to see what else we've got. Like, for example, there's one about if we go via NZ Locums, secure an overseas-based GP, does both NZ Locums and we as the employer need to be accredited, and which party needs to have third-party accreditation, NZ Locums or us as the employer, or both of us? So that's quite a difficult question to answer, because I guess it can be different multiple scenarios, because obviously we recruit doctors permanently and short term. So obviously the long-term permanent doctors we recruit normally will have a direct contractual relationship with the medical centre. So I guess in that instance, it's more on the practice will need to be accredited if they're employees. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Hiro? Paul?
It comes back to the who's issuing the employment agreement. So if your name is on the employment agreement, you need to be the accredited employer. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. There's a question around if a GP employee has come in before this program, will they be eligible for the new resident pathway? Hiro, Paul, I guess you've got the current 2021 residency pathway. They might be eligible for now, but
so if a GP if the GP came to New Zealand in the last 2 years, it is very likely that they came here on the critical purpose visitor visa. So if that's the case, they may be eligible for 2021 resident visa. So and this 2021 resident visa policy will stop on the 31st of July. So if they want to apply for a resident visa under 2021 resident visa policy, then they have to apply before 31st of July. If they are not eligible for 2021 resident visa, then then they may get a resident visa under Accredited Employer Work Visa policy, but they have to first obtain a Accredited Employer Work Visa. And if they are on the green list, they may be able to apply for a resident visa straight away, or they have to wait for 2 years until they become eligible, depending on their occupation.
Okay.
Just noting about the 2021 residence visa, they actually have to be in New Zealand to apply for it.
Right. Thank you. And look, we've nearly run out of time. I'll just ask this last question. I think, Paul, you already pretty much covered this. This is probably more of a clarification. What requirements for a GP who works for a main practice, I guess, for the main medical centre, but also is required to do after hours duty, which is a separate entity with different business number on a different site? So what sort of scenario would occur for that particular doctor or GP?
Yeah, so if that's part of his employment arrangement with his direct employer, their direct employer is getting some. So with controlling third parties, the direct employer has to have some sort of an arrangement with those other organisations, those separate legal entities. So there might be a contractual agreement between the direct employer and the other location or the other employer, but there's definitely something that underpins an arrangement that allows it, and therefore that employer, their direct employer, needs to be accredited under that controlling third party accreditation. And that's all about, risk mitigation and making sure that their worker has been looked after when they're working off site somewhere else. So the other site doesn't need to, unless they're hiring them directly. They would need to be accredited. Now, you need to know that you can only get an accredited employer work visa for one single accredited employer. You can't get it for two at the same time. Okay, so that when somebody submits a job check, it's only for one single accredited employer. Now, that accredited employer can be someone that farms them out to work for other employers, but they've got to have that special accreditation that allows them to send them to controlling third parties. I'm sorry if this sounds really complex. It probably is, but it's a lot simpler than I'm explaining it. But go to our website and you'll get more of an understanding. But basically, whoever is directly employing and is on the employment agreement must be the accredited employer.
Cool. No worries. Thank you. And I guess just tying in with that, I saw just a couple of questions that come in via the chat function. I think we're running out of time to answer those, but I guess ultimately, when an employer becomes, obviously, if they're successful in becoming an accredited employer, then they look at getting a job approved. When they go through that process, getting a job approved, is there, I guess, is there someone they can communicate with at Immigration New Zealand around any sort of queries they have with getting that job approved? Because there's a couple of queries in the chat, well, one in particular that could be a little bit complicated. Is there a way they can check as part of their process of I guess, applying for a job around their scenario in particular?
Yeah.
So is there a contact Immigration New Zealand, I guess, where they can ring? Is there that they can query that with?
Yeah. So it's all online application. So they should be able to check the status of the applications. So if they log in the immigration online, and then if they check their job check, and then it should say whether it's allocated to the case officer, or whether it's under the assessment, or whether it has been finalized. So you can check the status through the online system.
And will when it's I guess when immigration are reviewing the job application, if there are any queries, is it likely they may contact the employer directly? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So if immigration officers have questions about the job check, then they will come to the employer, and request more information.
Yep, no worries. And the last thing I asked, there's a question again about the tokens. Is it unique to the employer, or tokens different for every applicant? And from my understanding, it's unique to the specific job. Is that correct? That the employer's been approved for?
Yeah,
great.
That's correct.
All right, marvelous. Well, look, we've run out of time. It's 11:30 on the nose. So what we'll do is we'll wrap up the webinar. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Hero and Paul. Thank you so much for for your presentation today. It's great to hear of the initiatives and the changes that are going forward. And I can see how the Accredited Employer Work Visa process could be streamlined and it could work very, very well. So thank you for taking the time to walk through that with us. Thank you. And look, thank you for all those who are attending today as well. It's marvelous to see so many online during the webinar today. As mentioned, after the webinar, my colleague Yumi will send out some email correspondence with a link to this video so you can go back and review it if you like. Additionally, there will be opportunities if you've got any questions, please come back to Yumi and we'll do our best to address those via Hero and Paul and Immigration New Zealand in general. But look, thank you once again for your time. I really appreciate it. And look, hopefully we'll be in touch soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.